Tanya for the 2nd of Shevat prefers the story. There was a chassid from the city of Odessa. He was a sheichet in Odessa, and he once traveled with his wife to a mineral spring, which was found very far away from his house. And the owner of the village in which he stayed was a very old Jewish woman, and exceedingly old. And she had a house where so much of her descendants all lived in, and even her grandchildren were extremely old. So she was a tremendously old woman, and she sensed that the couple, the sheikh and his wife, were chassidim. So she said, "You'd be very interested to hear my story." And she told them like this. She said, when she was 25 years old, she was left in Aguna. Her husband disappeared. She had no idea where her husband was, and she decided she wants to meet the Baal Shem Tov. She heard the Baal Shem Tov was able to know things, and he was a big Rav and someone that could be a great help to her. So she desperately tried to meet the Baal Shem Tov, and she went to great effort, and she finally managed to meet the Baal Shem Tov. And she told the Baal Shem Tov her situation. She was a young woman. She was 25 years old. Her husband disappeared. She had a tiny child, and she wanted the Baal Shem Tov's help and assistance. The Baal Shem Tov rested his head on his hands, and he looked up and he said with a very heavy heart to this woman, the Baal Shem Tov said, "My daughter, I'm unable to help you because her husband had passed away, and she's going to remain in Aguna her whole life. There's no witnesses that exist that will be able to tell her that saw her husband pass away. There's nothing to be done." At the same time, Baal Shem Tov told her like this. He told her that if she conducts herself in a manner befitting a Jewish woman, he promises her that he's going to give a blessing that she'll live to see generations upon generations of descendants from this little boy, and that she'll always be provided for, always. And this woman told the Chassidim, the Baal Shem Tov gave me his word, and she said, I'm 105 years old, and I have 5 generations of descendants who all live around me. And she owned the entire town. She was very wealthy. The Tanya so far is halfway through explaining the soul. We had 4 different questions on the soul. Number 1, understanding its root. B, its character, what does it want? C, how we inherited the soul. And D, how this fear is included within the love as well. But we're saying there's a natural love within inside of ourselves. So we explained 2 of them so far. Inherited part, C, how we inherited it. We inherited it from our forefathers and their incredible service towards Hashem. They managed to bequeath to all the descendants after them an automatic love of Hashem. What is the root of the soul? It is Chachma. And because Chachma is so nullified and doesn't have definition, unlike the other parts of the system of wisdom, it's able to have the dwelling of Hashem's infinite light inside of it. So in chapter 18, we already explained 2 of them. And now in chapter 19, we're going to explain the other 2. The other 2 questions that remain. And number 1, what is the nature of this love? What is it striving for? What is it trying to achieve? Love is always towards something. Okay, what does the natural love want? And number 2, that we still have the question remaining for today's Tanya and tomorrow's Tanya, is how is fear incorporated in it? And that we'll talk about tomorrow. Uletisefes bia, chapter 19. Uletisefes bia tzarich levaya heitev mashikosov ner havaya nishmas adam. In order to continue explaining, the Alter Rebbe says we need to introduce a very famous verse, and the verse says, "Ner havaya nishmas adam." The soul of a man. Shlomo Melech tells us the soul of a man is a candle of Hashem. What does this mean? Jewish people called Adam. Our soul is like a flame of a candle. There's always flickering upwards. So in other words, we still remaining with the question: what's the nature of the soul? Shlomo Melech told us, you want to understand the nature of a soul? Understand the nature of a flame. A flame of a candle is going to behave in very similar ways as a soul. Okay, so what's the flame of a candle? Great. The flame of a candle is always flickering. Why? The in Eitz Chaim, in Kabbalistic works of the Arizal, written down by Chaim Vital, he explains what's going on with a candle. Why does a candle behave the way it does? And then this, I don't know if science is up to this yet, but there's a sub-lunar sphere. Between the Earth and the Moon, there's a sphere that surrounds a spiritual sphere that surrounds the world, and it's the element of fire. The flame wants to return back to its source, so it's always trying to escape from the wick and heading in that direction to the origin of where it comes from, which is upwards from whatever point you're at, because again it's sublunar, it's surrounding the world in a global way. So the flame naturally wants to depart from the wick to its own peril, doesn't matter, and go back to its source. And even though by this happening, if the flame would have its way and actually would be able to depart from the wick, it would cease to be. It'd be extinguished. It wouldn't remain here, and it wouldn't remain above, because once the flame returns back to its source, it's nullified within its source and no longer exists. If you look up the sublunar sphere surrounding the world, you don't see fire there because it's entirely nullified within its source. So why would the flame want this? This is the natural desire of the flame, and therefore this is what it does. It says, Shem told us that the soul behaves in the same way as a flame. The soul is the same way. The soul of a Jew behaves in the same way. And so too, not just the neshama, but also the ruach and the nefesh, the other two levels of the soul, they behave in exactly the same way. It naturally means like instinctively, without any logical decisions on its part, because it's a very illogical decision seemingly. It desires and yearns naturally to separate itself, depart from the body, and to cleave to Hashem, who is the foundation of all life. So the soul, though it knows that this is not, let's call it an illogical decision, this is the desire of the soul. It wants to leave the body and return to Hashem. So even though the soul, in addition to it wanting to continuously depart from the body and go back to Hashem, it also wants to go to Hashem knowing that it would lose its identity entirely. Its identity is only, the soul's identity is only when it's separated from Hashem, so to speak, in the body and having its own definition as a soul. But if the soul would actually get what it wants, which means to cling to Hashem and to lose itself within Hashem, it would lose its identity too as well. It would become nothingness within Hashem. But this is what it wants. This is its desire. And when we use the word nature, nature is a term for anything that doesn't have reason or comprehension. When you say it's the nature of a lion to behave in a certain way, well, if it was a logical thing, you wouldn't say it's nature. You say, well, that's very clever of the lion. They hunt in a particular way. But if it has an idiosyncrasy that makes no sense, you say, okay, well, that's the nature of the lion. Why does it do that? I don't know. That's what it does. You have certain animals that will do very seemingly silly types of behavior, things that make no rational sense. But this is just, you understand, this is just the way the animal behaves. The soul has, when we say the nature of the soul, it applies to something that doesn't really make sense or not really able to be understood easily. That's the nature. The nature of the soul is that it wants to lose itself, disconnect from the body, and return to Hashem, even though it's going to entirely lose its identity and cease to be its own identity as a soul. The soul's desire isn't something which should be understood and comprehended or logical or to be reasoned with. And it's something which is entirely super rational. It cannot be understood in a logical way, because why would the soul want that? But that triggers us back to what we spoke about yesterday. What does the soul come from? This is coming from the level of Chachma. And like we spoke about yesterday in the previous chapter, Chachma is something that is entirely super rational. It's not limited to wisdom at all, understandable wisdom at all. Bina does. But Chachma, the first level, it is absolutely just, it's a dot. It's a dot of pure logic that can't be ingested, downloaded, invested. It's beyond logic. The soul, part of its property as being chachma, being the highest level of intelligence, it's not defined by logic. And so this natural behavior of the soul, that it wants to lose itself and lose its identity and run away from the body, it's not something that could be understood. It has unlimited, blessed Ein Sof energy inside of it, the infinite light of Hashem inside of it, and that it cannot be understood in a human way. So we call it nature because it's so much above logic, not because it's below logic. It's so much above logic, it cannot be understood at all. In summary, we answered one of the questions today. We said, what is the nature of this love? That was one of the questions we introduced last chapter. What is the nature of this love and what does it strive for? And the Alter Rebbe said, its nature is similar to that of a candle. Just like a candle wants the flame, wants to jump away from the wick and lose itself in its source above, in the sublunar dimension, let's call it, surrounding the world, so too the soul wants to jump away from the body and lose itself within godliness, even to its own peril. Thank you so much for joining the Tanya. The Tanya is L'ilei Nishmas, Rufaiva Eliezer ben Yamin Halevi, Moshe Aaron Akai ben Yosef, Reuven ben Emmanuel, Aaron ben Avram, Esther Basu Moshe Mordechai, Simchas Tzvi Bas Shon Rosi, Eliyahu Moshe ben Avram, Sarah Miriam Bas Chaim ben Yamin, Chaim Moshe Bas Shon Avram, Lefu Shem v'Yaakov ben Aaron ben Nasmut Alakei, L'chai Bash Bracha, Moshe ben Esther ben Ahmad ben Edel ben Sion, Moshe Yosef ben Shnasar, Yeshua ben Kar, Yehud ben Rivka, anyone else needs the Yeshuas, and successful Jews on all the specialists in Israel, successful soldiers defending the Jewish people in the speedy coming of Mashiach. Have a wonderful, very successful day, and thank you so much for joining.